So perhaps we can get this online. Maybe even we'll send it out to everyone so you can have it. But there'll be more added to this list as we go along, because this is going to be a longer series. Because as we go along, to me, everything we're focusing upon here concerning God's glory and greatness, with this being part 3 today, it's so incredible. Everything that God did in molding and fashioning and telling things in advance, and some things so very specific, and how He brought them to pass. It's very inspiring. I find it very inspiring. So hopefully we are finding that inspiring and being more in awe of God Almighty to plan and prepare various things, which wasn't at the last minute either, because some things, even though they might have been prophesied 100, 140 years or over a couple of thousand years in advance, it was still planned long, long before that. And I hope we're coming to understand that more and more, and how God works. And if we can see those things, we should be more in awe too of God calling us, giving us the opportunity to have a place, because everyone fits into a place that He's molding and fashioning if we yield ourselves to that process. Anyway, we've been focusing on how God, again, has meticulously planned and brought to pass these things, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the people involved in it in many cases, and it just, to me, gets more and more exciting as we go along here. But today we're going to back up a little bit here and talk about a couple of things. Once again, this history has been covering the most important part, because it tells how God was working out His plan and purpose for the nation of Judah as we've been going through this. Because Israel, we looked at Israel, and God's purpose was to bring Israel, the kingdom of Israel, to an end, to even have 10 tribes that would be scattered in Europe for a future purpose, for the end time. Because it's about a 7,100-year plan when it's all said and done. And so various segments of things fit into different times, and God orchestrates it all. And so we've been focusing on this portion here then now of Judah being brought to her end, if you will, its end. And again, so many things took place here. We looked at how the Babylonians and the Medes had formed an alliance through a marriage with Nebuchadnezzar, of the princess of the Medes. And it's hard not to get ahead in some of this, because the Medes come up again, the Medo-Persian Empire. So different ones played different roles as we go along here. Up to the point in time of Nabopolassar, who was Nebuchadnezzar's father, the Babylonian region was under the rule as a whole of the Assyrians. They still had a king. They had kings in a dynasty at different times there, but they were still under them. And it's like we're coming to this point here now, Judah being under Babylon, but they had the kings. So sometimes nations had conquered various areas, but they allowed kings to rule, and in many cases here to pay taxation or a tribute for year by year, if you will, and they allowed them to continue on. So Nabopolassar was the first king of this new system, if you will, not under Assyria. They had rebelled against Assyria. They were attacking Assyria. And so we have the history here of how the Medes got together with them then because of this union of a marriage, and they became a force to reckon with. And so the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, ever how you want to refer to them, Babylon was the name of the city, the capital city, if you will, and so often they're referred to as the Babylonians in the region as well, but some historians and so forth refer to them only as Chaldeans. Anyway, can get kind of confusing sometimes, but so here we go as we're going through this portion here. We come up to the point where, again, Assyria had been attacked. Nineveh was already taken in 612 BC, which your chart shows you. So 612 BC, Nineveh was conquered by them. And then 609 BC, 3 years later, the entire nation fell. And then at the same time, we have the Egyptians who had a sway in the southern region there where Judah was, and they had an alliance with the Assyrians. So you have this situation where the Pharaoh Necho is coming up out of Egypt to join forces with the Assyrians to fight against the Babylonians in the north. And as he's coming up there, he is met by Let me go back here. I don't want to get this wrong. Josiah, if I'm correct here. And he goes out there, the king of Judah, to fight. And there's some things he didn't follow as far as instruction was given to him. He was an incredible king. If you go through the story there and read more about things that we didn't even cover. But he had an incredible reign, and he did some things there that he shouldn't have done. He disguised himself as he went out against the king there, or the Pharaoh, if you will, the army, and he was killed in Megiddo. So at this point here, we have the story then where Pharaoh Necho set up a king, or the people did, I'm sorry, the people of Judah set up a king. Pharaoh Necho didn't like it, so he took him with him back down into Egypt. He set up his own king, and the story just gets more convoluted as you go along. Hard to keep track. That's why we have this cheat sheet. So we've been going through this time period, bringing it up to the point in time we're discussing it here. But before we go on, there is one section here I want to delve into one more time here. And that is about Josiah, and again, this thing of Megiddo. 2 Kings 22, verse 30. So this is a part of the area where we left off. It says, then his servants moved his body, speaking of Josiah, in a chariot from Megiddo, brought him to Jerusalem and buried him in his own tomb. Then the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, anointed him and made him king in his father's place. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months, so it wasn't very long, obviously. He did that which was evil in the sight of the Eternal, according to all his fathers had done. Now, what an incredible thing here. Here you have Josiah, who was an incredible king, and the things he did, the kind of Passover that he kept when they went to work on the temple, and he gave the funds in charge for those who were working in that area, and gave charge to them to use those funds for that. And then they found the book of the law, and they read the book of the law, and he was right down the line, got rid of so much as far as worshiping false gods. And then you have his children, and you see what took place with them, and how over and over again here they rebelled, and they wanted to go back to that other system. And you think, what an incredible thing of the mind sometimes, and you have things that you see or should have been able to see, on a physical plane that God had done, and they rejected it and did their own thing. Incredible. So this is a story here that's repeated all the way down through here as we go along. So it was only 3 months, but he did evil in the sight of the Eternal, it says, according to all that his fathers had done, speaking of those who had done that, not Josiah, but those who had been known for evil. And like Manasseh, he was the worst. Then Pharaoh Necho bound him at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem, and put the land in tribute, so this taxation or tribute, if you will, of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Then Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in place of his father Josiah, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. Then took Jehoahaz and went to Egypt, and he died there. So we're up to this point here of Jehoiakim's reign, and I'm picking this portion here to interject something that I'd mentioned in, I believe, the first sermon in this series, that I'd mentioned that is separate from all of this, but I'm pulling it back in for a reason. We covered this in part 1. I interjected something in the sermon on that particular Sabbath, and mentioned some things about atonement that come to my attention because it kind of fit into some of the lessons, because there are all kinds, as we go through these stories, it is amazing the number of lessons. Every time you go into studying one of the kings and things that happened, there are lessons for us. And so many of these things, though it was physical for them, is spiritual for us, and we're to learn from it. That's why those things are written. And we're going to see that over and over and over again. So every once in a while, something is interjected that has to do with us, that has to do with the end time, perhaps. And you'll see a lot more of that as we get deeper into the sermon series. So, in part 2, Again, we covered some of the incredible things of Josiah, and that's where I wanted to mention this was last Sabbath, and I missed it. But it's stated in 2 Kings 22, verse 2, about Josiah. So I'm going to go back to that, and then we'll go forward again. He, Josiah, did right in the sight of the Eternal, and walked in the ways of his father David. Now, it wasn't an immediate father, but that's a term that's used in the Hebrew. That's how it's translated. So we're talking about one that they looked to, one that set the example for the kings of Judah that they strived to follow, the ones who did try to follow God. And so this is the format here. He did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. And how many times have we been told that without reading this? Now, we're to turn right and left when God directs us to, but on our own, we're not to turn away from God's way to the right hand or to the left, which is the tendency of human nature as we've covered, because people by nature tend to have something along the entire spectrum there, from liberal to conservative, sometimes ultra-liberal to ultra-conservative, or somewhere within a spectrum. And for us, the only way we can really be right is in God's way, and that has to be a matter of being led by God's Spirit. But we all have natural human tendencies apart from God's Spirit that put us somewhere in a spectrum there that isn't right. We're not right. We're not correct in our life. God has to show us how to live to be right with Him. And so those are things we have to go through, change and choices we have to make. So he did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. And this is how we want to be when it comes to God's way of life. So we're ever learning. And so it was interjected in that particular sermon about something that had bothered someone concerning atonement. And it concerned someone who ate a mint or mince and also offered them to some others. At least that's how the story came across. That's what was told. And the reality was that that was done. An individual did partake of a mint on the Sabbath, on that Sabbath, a high day, an annual day, a holy day. But it's a day of not eating anything. So I'm trying to clarify some things and use this as an example to help us have a better balance of being more on target, being more balanced, being right on in God's way of life. Now, on atonement, since it's coming up pretty soon, just so everyone understands, we don't eat anything, period. There is nothing you consume, no liquid, no food, no candy, nothing. And it came out that no minister had done that. No minister had said that that was okay. And anyway, ministers have been seen taking a candy or whatever it might be, or a mint. I take mints. I had mint before services here. Now, during the service, I might do it as well. There's nothing wrong with that, but on atonement, there is something wrong with that. Okay? So, I could go a little farther in this, and I'm not going to. I want to get through this because we need to get through this portion here. Someone asked me after services, after I'd mentioned this, is it okay to have one of these little spray things? You spray in your mouth? Because, you know, when you don't eat anything or drink anything, we tend to stand back a little farther from each other. And so someone was asking, well, what about that? Well, it's a negligible thing that has nothing to do with food that's going to go down your throat. It sticks to your roof of your mouth or whatever. And so something like that, I don't have a problem with. Gum, I do a little more. That's just me. In my mind toward God. A mint, no, because you're going to consume it. It's going to go in for sure. So we have to look at the balancing these things and what is right before God and strive to do the best we can. So that's why I'm giving some of this, to let individuals know that, no, you can't have things like that on a regular basis on that day just because your breath smells and you're going to eat mints all day long because you don't want to offend someone else. Well, it's more important not to be offensive to God Almighty, who gave us the matter of not eating and consuming anything on that particular day. That's our measurement. That's the most important thing of all. So again, an elder didn't pass this along. It wasn't stated by any particular elder that it was okay, because you know what? If they had, they'd be in trouble. I have no hesitation of correcting them. We all make mistakes. Someone would have made a mistake in that particular area. Not going to be bashed over the head, just corrected. So we have those things. None of us does anything perfect in life. This is a matter of correction as well, to someone who felt that perhaps it was okay to do this and to pass them around to others. No, it's not, if it was passed around. And see, this brings up another issue. When you hear two sides of a story, it's two sides of a story. That's why brethren are told, if there is something that's not clear to you, that you feel someone else has done, you know what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to go to them alone. That's what this is all about, to save all this from happening in the first place. If that had been done God's way, which is God's way, and obeying God, then this wouldn't have gotten to me. It wouldn't have come that far. I wouldn't have to be preaching about it. It could have been resolved. I have given many sermons on this of recent time, that if the church had done this ever since I've been in the church, since 1969, it would have resolved many, 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 many problems. But it's one of the worst things that hasn't been obeyed in God's church. And God, God's Son, gave that instruction of what we're supposed to do. And then, if we can't resolve something, and you keep being bothered by it, you know what you're supposed to do? If it doesn't seem like the air was cleared properly with someone else, go to them again. Make sure that you understand. Make sure that things are clarified. Ask more specific questions if you have to, but go to your brother alone. Now, if there's no reconciling there taking place, if there's no change taking place, if there has been sin, if you know that it's sin, so often we do things and it's not even a matter of sin. So many things can be talked out because it's not a matter of the other person sinning. It may be your standard or someone's standard of what they think is right and wrong, but that doesn't determine sin. It has to be something you know is a matter of sin. So if it's a matter of sin then, and it needs to be reconciled and taken care of because you have a duty to do, what are you to do then? Go to the ministry. And again, to one in your area, to the one who is closest to you, and ask the question, whatever it is that's bothering you. Don't let it fester, don't let it go on for months. Go to them and discuss something with them so that you can bounce something off to make sure that you're thinking right. And if something has been done wrong, then they will address that and let you know that they're going to address it. End of story. And you don't have to worry about it anymore. They may give you some guidance and direction. They may tell you, have you gone to your brother alone? That's the number one thing most ministers should always ask. Have you gone to your brother alone yet? Well, then do it. Most of the time when people go to the minister, they haven't even gone to their brother yet. You know what you're doing in a case like that? You're sinning. The other person may not be sinning in what you think they're doing, but you have sinned if you don't do it, because Christ told us to do it. So I hope we understand that. We can be guilty of something far more than someone that we think has done something wrong. Does that make sense? Because we're disobeying God, because we haven't done it God's way to go to our brother alone. Then to go to a minister. Then if the minister has a question about it, he'll get a hold of the one that's over that particular region, whoever it might be, here in the country, as far as U.S. is concerned. And then it should be totally resolved. So be careful. Don't send it to me, because then you're really sinning if you haven't followed through and followed the government of God, because that's another level. You are to follow the government God has established. Enough said. Things to learn from. Interjected here. in the midst of a sermon series. So now we're going back to where we left off in part 2. So now when Assyria fell and Josiah was killed in Megiddo by the Egyptians in 609 BC, the timing of events becomes a little more difficult. So this to me has been a very inspiring area to go through and to be in awe of God doing it as he reveals and helps to better understand some of the things that took place. There are so many things in contradiction and conflict by historians, mainly by them because they don't want to acknowledge anything out of the Bible. A lot of scholars, they don't want to have anything to do with the Bible, so they won't accept certain time frames that are in the Bible. Then some on the religious side, or supposedly the scholarly side there as far as theologians are concerned, they have other conflicts, so it becomes a mess sometimes, an absolute mess you've got to wade through. Anyway, I've been wading through a mess throughout this series. So as we go forward, we don't have all the facts concerning all chronology, but we're pretty close, spot on. So that's the best we can do, is strive to be as close to the scriptural accounts that they agree with one another. And when they agree as far as timing is concerned, that's great. When they don't, the way others have done it, it really becomes a mess. So sometimes you have to be careful if you ever do something like that, to be careful what you're going through, because it's very easy to get off course if you're not careful. We have to stick so close to the present truth and to what God says in Scripture. So in 609 BC, the next great events were in 606. And I don't know basically of anyone that accepts this as a whole. There are maybe one or two out there that touch upon it a little bit. People want to put all their eggs in one or two baskets here when it comes to the captivity of Judah. Two major dates. No, they had other events take place at different times. And it's very clear in Scripture that 606 is another period of time that certain events took place. But they don't want to accept some of those things. It's just typical of the truth and the world around us that don't really care that much about it. And they go along with maybe what a scholar has said, and they don't really research it like they should. Shame on them. Because even on a physical plane, you should be able to do something like this. It's not that hard. It's not rocket science. It may feel like it, but. So I get here. The next great events take place in 606, and this is 3 years after Josiah had been killed in Megiddo, and Jehoiakim had been placed as king by Pharaoh Necho. So now we go to Daniel 1, Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. And when you see different ones here, and when they were taken captive, to me, this is hard to have words even express how incredible all these things are of the different prophets and how God used them during this time period. This was an incredibly important period of time. And as we're going to see as we go along, so much of it has to do with the end time and God looking forward to the end time by certain events that took place there that were to set the stage for things that happened much, much later on, orchestrating it all and letting us learn through the course of time. So it says here in Daniel 1, verse 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of king of Judah. So when is that? 606 BC. Pharaoh Necho put him in place in 609. So now we're talking about 606. It's very clear. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came unto Jerusalem and besieged it. So this is the first time. This is the first event when Nebuchadnezzar, his army anyway, and he wasn't fully king yet at this point here, but because his father didn't die until 605, but he was co-regent together for this period of time. History has it in a sense that Nabopolassar was ill for whatever reasons as well. Sometimes a son would be sent out as a part of an invasion, but this is saying here, making it very clear here, from his vantage point. So Daniel is writing from where? From Babylon. The king is Nebuchadnezzar. So he's referring to Nebuchadnezzar and things that he did. So he's referring to him as King Nebuchadnezzar, not saying he's king at this moment in time, but he's referring to King Nebuchadnezzar and what he did. So whether he came in as they so often did, the son went out leading the army because Nebuchadnezzar wasn't able to, or even if they went together, it doesn't matter. It was told here that this is about Nebuchadnezzar. Came into Jerusalem and besieged it. So again, verses like this tend to trip people up because they can't fit it together. And I've been through this looking at different so-called authorities out there, and it's an absolute mess. So if it's taken that Nebuchadnezzar was literally king at that time, again, obviously that creates problems because he couldn't have been in 606. And his father didn't die till 605. And so again, here Daniel's writing from position that he is king at that time, and he's telling a story here about what he did back in 606, explaining the events that took place. Anyway, Daniel 1, verse 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim. So that's the one you go by. It's very clear. We know that's in 606 BC. It says, king of Judah, Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came into Jerusalem and besieged it. Then the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. So it's very clear here that Jehoiakim then was subservient to Nebuchadnezzar. And because it says God gave it to him, gave Jehoiakim to him, and the ability to besiege Jerusalem at that moment in time. And so it goes on to say, so let's just read it again. Then the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God. So they took tribute with them. That's why they looked upon it. And then they charged them, paying tribute to them, to him, to Babylon, to Nebuchadnezzar, to his father, if you will, whatever, but to Babylon. And basically told, no longer is it going to be Pharaoh Necho. So he listened for 3 years. He was subservient, if you will. He accepted this defeat and paid tribute to Babylon. So it says here, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. So it's very specific here what he did. So he put them in a specific location, the house of his God. It becomes important later on. And he brought the vessels into the treasure houses of his God. So the king spoke unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes. So it wasn't just some of the treasure, a small portion of it, as a tribute right away, and then they would pay tribute while they're away. They were supposed to. But also, different individuals were taken. Daniel's telling a story of how he ended up in Babylon. He was taken captive in 606 BC. That's what this introduction is about. He's telling what happened to him and why it was that he's writing this there. So given to the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and the king's seed and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well-favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace. So one of the very best. So how they went through that process, I don't know. But it probably wasn't all that hard to know those who were being educated, those who were being trained, those who were serving in a capacity already that was obvious, and understanding, and they were young. Incredible. To me, this is always inspiring when you read stories like this, because when you read about some of these, they're 15, 16, 17, and 18 years old. Amazing. And God had already chosen them. And we're going to see where he chose them, in some cases, a whole lot earlier. It makes it really, really clear when he did it. And that becomes even more inspiring. That's why if we can see something that God did back then, we should be in awe that God has called us and given us the kind of calling He has, truly, because of a place that He has for us in His family. That's why we're called. And we have such incredible opportunity if we could just see it. Because the more we see it, the more we'll fight for it, the more we'll hold on to it. Because my greatest disillusionment in so many of these things since 1969 is seeing all the people who have turned against what God offered them. Reminds me of a family one time that I'd gotten to know fairly well in the area where I was called, who called into the church around the same time period, a little after. And they asked one time, made a comment about, how do you know you're going to be in God's family? It's like, what a question to ask. I was a little stunned by it. I was very young spiritually. Just started. Like, what else is there? What's in your mind? I didn't ask that, but that's kind of my thinking, and it stuck with me. How could you think anything but that? You're called to be in God's family. What is greater? Don't you have a confidence in that if you know that God has called you? That this is what you're fighting for? Isn't that what you said at baptism? I'm yours, God. And from then on, if you follow what's given to you, that's where you're going to be, in God's family. Children in whom is no blemish, but well-favored, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, understanding in science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace. So he wanted the very best to be brought in, to train, to work with, of whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Verse 5, so the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, and so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. 19, 20, in through there. Incredible. So that at the end of their training, they're going to be able to do the job, fluent in the Chaldean tongue. That was Nebuchadnezzar's purpose in the first place here, of what he was striving for. Now, among those who were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Incredible. All mentioned together. They were taken in 606. Unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. For they gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, to Hananiah of Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. What an awesome introduction to a book. That here was Daniel's calling to be a prophet. God was going to use him as such. He was going to use the other three. They're mentioned for a purpose, obviously, as well. There were others that were taken, but these are going to be at the forefront of God's purpose and God's plan and what he's going to do while they're in captivity. 2 Kings 24 and verse 1. In the days of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, it says came up, but the word is ascended. He has to go up. He went up, in other words, against Jerusalem. So it's the same story here that's being told. Again, 606 BC. That's what the period of time is. And Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. So it's very clear, just like it said, God gave Jehoiakim into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, and he was his servant for 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him at the end of 3 years. And these things become important as you're reading the story. If you don't pay any attention to the time frame of these things, then it doesn't mean a whole lot. And it's very obvious when you read through various things historians have written, it doesn't mean a whole lot to them. They're not really concerned that much with the truth and keeping things accurate. That's why I'm inspired, moved by the fact that God blesses us with ability to see things, to know things in a fashion that's very unique to God's own church, because it's his church. So what happened then at the end of 3 years? He rebelled. He quit paying tribute. So we've read about one prophet, Daniel, who had been taken in 606. And there's a lot written about this period of time by another prophet. It was Jeremiah. He was never taken captive to Babylon. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 1. Inspiring story here. So many prophets in this time period. It really is quite amazing because their stories and things they wrote about are about the future. And this has puzzled a lot of people through time, to the point in some cases, like Ezekiel, he's rejected because of what he wrote. He's rejected by many because of what he wrote. They say it can't be true. Jeremiah 1, verse 1. The words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, of the priests that were in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of the Eternal came in the days of Josiah. Now again here, Josiah reigned 31 years, and so things get a little more specific here. The son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign, of Josiah. So that's in 627 BC. Very simple. So here he has a start. He's called first to fulfill a job, a function that is profound by the time it's over with. It truly is. It's so inspiring what Jeremiah lived, what he saw, what he went through, what he experienced, how God used him, what he wrote. It's just to the point of sending chills up and down your spine when you see the story. It came also in the days of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, unto the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah. He's the last king of Judah. So Jeremiah has a long, long time as a prophet. And it's going through and explaining some of this. But he's explaining here his calling, prophet, and what he's writing here. He says, goes on to say, so it's giving this time frame. Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, unto the carrying away of Jerusalem captive in the 5th month. So it's taking it all the way up. So Jeremiah was a prophet unto Judah for 41 years unto this point. So that's what it's addressing here. This is what Jeremiah is addressing here. He's giving an overview of things he's going to write about in the book, contained in the book. Verse 4, then the word of the Eternal came unto me, saying, behold, I formed you in the belly. I knew you. Or before I formed you in the belly, I knew you. Awesome. What does that mean? Before anything was ever created, God knew Jeremiah. There was going to be a time. That's why these things don't just happen at the last minute. God has a plan and purpose. He's been working out about a 7,100-year period that he planned a long, long time ago. And he didn't just start when finally Adam and Eve were created in the, well, how long is this going to be now? It was very clear from the very beginning. The 7-day week, the 7,000-year plan. And then later on, he gives us more an understanding when he tells us about the last great day, which he gave to Herbert Armstrong. Understanding of what it was all about, what it pictured, what it meant, because that's when it was given. Just because it's been written doesn't mean people understood it, as so many things are in Scripture, especially for the end time. So not only did I know you, he's saying, I formed you in the belly of your mother. We've been talking about some of that kind of thing. God can do that. If God has a specific purpose in some cases, in time, not all cases. That's why I think of the church over 2,000 years. That hasn't been the case of all people that have been called into the church by any measure. But for specific ones, especially in the first 4,000 years, there are different ones that God was determined were going to serve him in a certain way. If we could grasp a little bit more about his own son. But the Father had to be him. But for others, he could work with human beings, mothers and fathers, in bringing them together. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, their wives, starting with Sarah, on down. Not by chance, not by accident, that there were different ones that God brought together. God knows He made us. He knows our genes. He knows what He wants to make. He knows what He wants to create. And all those little things that swim around in the thousands and thousands and thousands, God can direct the ones that are to be together. The one that He wants. Because it's going to produce a certain person, a certain individual, with whom when He begins to work with them and give them His Spirit, they're going to respond. Now that's an awesome thing to understand, because He has something very specific to fulfill. His Son had something very specific to fulfill and had to be His Son, to have that mind in Him from the moment of birth, that as a child, as He grew, none other like Him, couldn't be another like Him. But to have others through time with whom God could work, the power and might of Almighty God. We're only beginning to scratch the surface of it. There are things we don't even begin to grasp in how God has worked. People still have choice. But what an awesome thing when He has a specific part to fulfill, a specific thing that someone must fulfill because they live at that moment in time and what has to come to pass. And He knows that with His Spirit, how they will respond to Him, because He can mold and fashion the environment around them to help them to grow. Why would you want? Do you think Jeremiah would wanted something else? I don't want anything else. Do you think you think about our calling, why would you want anything else? If you look at the world and what people have left God's church for, why do you want that? Why don't you want what God can mold and fashion in your mind to transform your thinking and your being to become something so incredibly great you can't even begin to imagine it? In His family? In the God family? Oh, I'd rather go off and have sex with so-and-so over here than that. That's the majority of people who have left God's church. They've done it over that. That's the number one thing within the ministry as a whole that people have had to deal with over time. Some of the most unimaginable things that people let their emotions and their feelings get away from them, and they're not in control, and they're not putting God first, and they become weak, and they do things they shouldn't do. Others, because they get lifted up with pride and begin to think people should listen to them and their ideas. And they get these ideas of what is true and what is false, and so, Herbert Armstrong, that's not true. It's like, that's why all those ministers, you think, how dumb can you get to think that he was just a great teacher? I'd like to smack him in the face. When I've been told that, had to hold back. Because inside, my carnality really wants to do that. I mean, jar some sense into your mind. You don't know diddly crap except for what God gave to that apostle and gave to his church. And they get lifted up with pride, thinking they know better, thinking they know more, thinking they know some truth that he never saw and can go over here and start something different. I hope we've gone through enough in God's church. We are so convicted of that. We know that inside and out. Anyway, what an incredible story then about Jeremiah. What a thing to be told. I knew you before I formed you in the belly. We can understand this more deeply today than he was able to. Now, he had to be moved by this. Truly. That the great God of the universe knew me? Anyway, before I formed you in the belly, I knew you. And before you came forth out of the womb, I sanctified you. That's what he was set apart for holy use and purpose. When? Before anything was ever created. Now, the actual sanctification couldn't take place until he was there, but that was the plan. And so he formed him in the womb. He came out, and he said, before you even came out, you were sanctified. You were set apart for holy use and purpose. For what? To be a prophet, to be one who would help bring to pass prophecies that would take place through time into the end time, the very end, and still be going on. Queen Elizabeth's throne exists because of what God did through Jeremiah. Awesome, awesome, awesome. God's plan, forward looking into time because of his promise to David. Well, it was his plan and what he was going to do as far as the end of an age, and for Manasseh and Ephraim, primarily Ephraim, but Manasseh was going to come out as well. I sanctified you, and the word isn't ordained, I made you. It's literally what the word is. I made you a prophet. That's his purpose. That was the reason he molded and fashioned him in the womb. I made you a prophet unto the nations. And it's not just a matter of nations that existed then. It's going to be nations through time, all the way up to the end and beyond. Then I said, O Lord eternal, behold, I cannot speak, for I am but a youth. God called these different individuals at a very young age. So often in their upper teens when they begin to do what they did, low 20s. For I am but a youth. But the Eternal said to me, do not say, I am a youth, for you shall go to all that I shall send you, and whatever I give you charge, you shall speak. So God was going to give him what he needed. I think of Moses when he felt so inadequate. He wasn't a youth. But because of whether it be a kind of a lisp or whatever it was that he might have had, he didn't want to do what God was telling him. And so God said, well, okay. God would have given it to him, the ability and so forth, but gave it to Aaron to do. Verse 8, do not be afraid of their faces, for I am with you to deliver you. Now, he went through a lot. Confined, imprisoned, put in a pit of mud, murky manure, feces. He was treated pretty poorly. In other words, while he was a prophet. And it's when you're down there and something like that if you have a carnal mind, well, is this all for real or not? But he didn't think that way. He'd been molded and fashioned to think a very unique way as God's prophet. Do not be afraid of their faces, for I am with you to deliver you, says the Eternal. In other words, I am there always. You'll be delivered, whether it be in your physical life or beyond, because in time everybody dies. Doesn't matter how. Then the Eternal put forth his hand and touched his mouth. Then the Eternal said to me, behold, I have put my words in your mouth. So it had to be a very moving thing for Jeremiah to experience, because he didn't have anyone else he knew that this had ever happened to. And here, this is being told to him. How God told him, we don't know. It doesn't say. In what form? So he made it very clear to him, my words will be in your mouth. They're going to be right up here, and when you need them, I'll be there, and you will speak what I give to you. That's what he was telling him. See, I have this day set you over the nations and over the kingdoms to root out, to pull down, to destroy. His prophecies talk about different ones, including Judah, is going to be destroyed, and some others as well. To throw down, to build, and to plant. That was his commission. Awesome. 2 Kings 24. Now, how can we help but think of the glory and the greatness of Almighty God in something like this? 2 Kings 24, verse 1. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, again, went up unto Jehoiakim. So again, 606, became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him, so he quit paying tribute. So the Eternal, that's how he knew, he's rebelled. No tribute. So the Eternal sent against him bands of the Chaldeans, and bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it. So basically all sides were coming against, so God sent different ones in and including out of Babylon then, to take care of this rebellion. According to the word of the Eternal, which he spoke to his servants, the prophets. Surely, at the commandment of the Eternal, this came upon Judah to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh. So this is what's being looked at as the marker of time for God's judgment then. And again, all of that, part of a purpose and a plan, so that Judah would come to that moment in time by letting people go their own course and the kings go their own way and what they would do without his intervention, because it requires God's intervention to turn to. If God hadn't been working with Josiah, Josiah couldn't have done what he did. God was working with him to draw him to do the very things he did, moving him to do various things as a child, as a young person. Incredible stories. And so it is throughout time. God was working with David when he was a very young man, and David knew it. David knew that it was God that was giving him the ability to fight a lion, to fight a bear, to do the things he did that other men you just don't do, the way Daniel did as a young man. He gave the honor and the credit. He recognized this was of God. Wasn't lifted up by his own abilities. And it gave him courage to do something later on before God. And that was to go up against Goliath. He wasn't afraid. He couldn't understand why the army wasn't going out to destroy who was making fun of God and God's people. He's like, what are you doing? That was in his mind. So he wanted to go out, and he was so kind of obnoxious about it that Saul let him go out. Okay, give him the armor. He couldn't even put it on and wear it and walk. He was so little in comparison to what they wanted to give to him to go out there. And so he just got a few rocks and a sling, and he went charging out there. Stupid old giant. Anyway. What a mind to have. All for God. All for God. Do we think that way? This is for God's church. This is for God's people. This is for God. Going to do it. Whatever it requires, going to stand up to whatever it is out there. That's why God told Jeremiah. Jeremiah basically, don't fear them. Don't fear anyone. You've got a job to do. Don't be fearful of how they treat you, how they act toward you, what they say to you, about you. None of that matters. Go do it. So we're all in that boat. That's what we're to do. So again, For the sons of Manasseh, according to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood that he shed. For he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Eternal would not pardon. So God gave certain prophecies, certain things he said were going to take place. The time had come for Judah, so he allowed these things to take place. He could have stopped them earlier, but he let him have the longest reign of all the kings of Judah, so that this would come to a peak of such filth and ugliness when they're on their own to do all that it did, that there is a judgment for that. But it's his own choice. He did it. He didn't listen to those of the past. He didn't try to follow the way of David. He didn't care about God. So he was judged according to. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So again, Nebuchadnezzar went up against Jerusalem and took the first captives to Babylon, as well as vessels of the house of God. Some, because there are going to be some other sackings that take place here, where more things are taken. It took them a long time to strip it all. This is an incredible story in itself. To take everything with them back to Babylon, it took them a long time. Various times of siege to do what they did. It wasn't just 2 times, as so many like to focus upon. So this was the first one. Jeremiah 46. Back to Jeremiah. Because now we're coming to the following year here of 605 BC. A lot took place in this particular year. Jeremiah 46, verse 1. The word of the Eternal which came to Jeremiah the prophet against the nations, against Egypt concerning the army of Pharaoh Necho. So this is very specific. There are other prophecies about other nations, other prophecies about the future. This is about here. Concerning the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, which was by the river Euphrates in Carchemish, in which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, defeated in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. When was that? 605, I'm sorry. 605, so the 4th year of Jehoiakim. He started in 609. This brings us down to this point in time here of 605. It was in this year of 605 BC that Nabopolassar, the first king of Babylon, not under the Assyrians because they were conquering the Assyrians, so they were separate. They had determined to go and fight against the Assyrians, to take them from underneath their tribute, if you will, and their role and power over them. And so something that is recognized in history, incredibly so. And so he was the first here because of, again, this pact with the Medes. So right after he rose to power, he went out to fight the Egyptians, and who were still occupying some of the conquered region of Assyria that we've gone through here now and looked at. And so as Jeremiah wrote, Nebuchadnezzar had a decisive victory in Egypt at Carchemish in the year 605 BC when he came to power. So he didn't waste any time. Once he'd come into power, he went out and fought against the Egyptians to get them totally out of Judah. That was his purpose and plan, to conquer that entire region. Whereas before it was split between the Assyrians to the north and the Egyptians south of the Euphrates. So this is where the battle took place. Jeremiah 25, verse 1. The word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. This was the first year. So again here, this is the first year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So it's 605. So that's what we're talking about again here, just as Jeremiah 46 is all about, because again, battle is recognized in history, Carchemish and what took place there, and how they had the power to defeat the Egyptians in this particular location. Now, again here, it doesn't, let me read this, I gotta catch this back up. All the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, that was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So pretty specific. Your scripture says that, right? Good. We're on the same page. Oh. Now, again here, timing like this, when you go through some of these things, it becomes quite apparent that when something is written like this, that it's important to God. Important that the message has gotten across, that we grasp and comprehend the flow of events, to be more in awe of what God was orchestrating. Because everything is precise, and certain things had to take place at a certain time in order to accomplish what he was doing. He was getting rid of the Assyrians. Their rule, their influence in the world was being diminished. The Egyptians, theirs was being diminished. It wasn't diminished right away here because there's a little more work to be done, but it's being diminished. There comes a point in time where it says the Egyptians no longer came up into the area of Judah after a certain point in time. So again, God is orchestrating all these events through time. Babylon's becoming greater, coming to the point in time where Daniel's going to write about it, about Nebuchadnezzar himself and that statue, the head of gold. You are the head of gold, Nebuchadnezzar. What an awesome story. A story that spans time to the end of the age, when that giant cube comes out of the heavens and smashes the feet, crumbles and crushes the feet of the statue to where it destroys everything about all the kingdoms. Babylon, Babylon has fallen. Beautiful. So when that all took place, when you think about Nebuchadnezzar and what he saw, it wasn't like God said, well, you know what? Right now it'd be a good time for him to have a vision to see this statue and these 4 kingdoms. Yeah. God doesn't work that way. All these things were planned out long before. Nations that would arise, people who would arise, different ones in the world that God would orchestrate and work with, the rise and fall of kingdoms through time. Even different ones he appointed very specifically at times to reign and to rule. And those things are still going on to this day today, more today now than in times past here as a whole. Even different ones who are in positions of where they're ruling for great reasons and great lessons that will come out in time, more and more. Why things are happening in this country the way they are. Specific leaders that have brought us to this point in time, that God, people think they're voting people into office. Okay. Think what you will. But God's in control of allowing different ones to come in for a purpose that he's going to accomplish and fulfill by letting certain ones be there. Otherwise, certain things won't come to the surface. We wouldn't have all that we have right now coming to the surface about how corrupt every facet of government is, to where people get their belly full of all the lying and the conniving and the evil that exists in governments. And God's allowing us to see that in the end time. And he's allowing other peoples in the world to start seeing some of these things in the end time. The same thing is true in Europe and what's happening throughout Europe. The same thing is true in what's happening in Russia and who's ruling and the mindset that's there. The same thing in China and what's happening there. The same thing in Japan and what's happening there. God is all powerful and almighty to work with and blend and bring these things together, orchestrate so that things and people have a choice to all this. But God is the one who determines which ones will have influence for a greater purpose that has to come out. So we can learn, so that measly human beings, because we're pitiful. What would we have if there were no God? Not much more. We'd be about over with, because the technology, it's just the handwriting's on the wall, like we're going to see in Daniel a little bit later. Meeny, meeny, tickle for you, farson. You know, we're found wanting. Yeah, we don't have what we need. We need God. We have to have God's mind, God's spirit, God's life. That's the only thing that works. Our ways, the ways of mankind, cause nothing but sorrow and pain and Babylon. Massive confusion. Today, Babylon is screaming its voice so loud. You talk about confusion, no soundness of mind in so many cases. Like, how can you even think that way? Yeah, let's all go out and get electric cars. Yeah. What about all those batteries? Oh, don't worry about that. What are you going to do with them a few years down the road? Don't worry, we'll take care of that later on. I'm sorry. Absolute stupidity and ignorance and foolishness, unsound minds, unbalanced minds, a people that have no idea, they can't think right. And God's allowing that to happen for a purpose and a reason, to bring about what must come to pass at the end of this age. Let me find my spot. Verse 2. I'll just read verse 1 again. The word that came to Jeremiah concerning, Jeremiah 25, verse 1. The word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year. So again, what he spoke, what he said. Of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, that was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, in which Jeremiah the prophet spoke unto all the people of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, saying, from the 13th year of Josiah, 627 BC, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, even unto this day, 605 BC, will be the 23rd year that the word of the Eternal has come unto me, and I have spoken unto you, rising early and speaking, and you have not listened. Not a shock, is it? Powerful lesson, because that's the way it's been through time. Abel, the very first preacher of righteousness. And from then on, what has the carnal mind, human mind been like? What has been very evident, especially when messages have gone out that God has sent out to different ones? They don't want it. They don't care. The only thing that makes the difference is if God is drawing individuals to see something, to learn something. I think of worldwide during Herbert Armstrong's time. There were some drawn who weren't called to be a part of the church. They were drawn to be co-workers, large numbers, to support something, to be there to have a point, to see something to a certain area that they could grasp hold of and be drawn to and moved by enough that they wanted to support it. God did that. God did all that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been there, period. God has to do those kinds of things because the carnal mind is enmity against God. It's not subject to the law of God, the ways of God. It doesn't want God. And so when the truth comes along, it's different than traditional Christianity. It's different than Judaism. It's different than Buddhism. It's different than all these things that people can be drawn to and support by their own choosing and desires, or what they've been taught perhaps as children and on up. But it's different and it's unique when it has to do with God, when it has to do with the truth. And you find that out very soon in your calling if you try to share this way of life with someone else. The Sabbath, the holy days, tithing, and when people see it affects that part of their life, especially, and you can't work on the Sabbath whenever you want to, or you can't work on certain holy days, and you have to send in a certain amount, it's like, I need to rethink this. Anyway, human nature gets involved to the point where people really hate it deep down inside. The only ones that are different are the ones being drawn by God's Spirit who have choices to make. Can you receive it? Can you embrace it with God's help? And you realize that you need God's help to continue on the course? Do you know that you need God's help to stay in the battle? Because without God's help, you can't stay in the battle even. That's why we learn. We're supposed to learn. Better cry out to God every day. I need your help. I need your Spirit. Because you can't do it on your own. You can't hold on to this on your own. And in the midst of all that learning, God has a lot of patience and mercy. Because sometimes it takes a lot of time to get that deeply ingrained in our being. We're slow learners sometimes. Thank God for His patience and His mercy. But when He has a purpose of calling you, He has a purpose of seeing it through if you will receive what He has and the correction along the way that we have to have as human beings. So again here, in which Jeremiah the prophet spoke unto all the people of Judah and to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, saying, from the 13th year on up to this day, he said, which has been 23 years now, the word of the Eternal has come to me, and that's what he lets them know. This is what I've been speaking to you. I've spoken to you rising early and speaking, but you have not listened. Same thing today. People don't want to hear. They don't want to listen, no matter what's out there as a whole, unless God's drawing them, and that's not happening yet. The Eternal has sent unto you all His servants the prophets, rising early and sending them, but you have not listened. That's the history of the world. Nor incline your ear to hear. That's why I can't help but think of what was stated in 1. If you will listen, God will listen. That's the problem. People won't listen. Sad. What a horrible thing. So again, God marking the importance of all these periods of time. And we're going to stop there today. Next portion here is too long to get into. Since we need to leave early, a little early, we can easily vacate by 5. I'd like to see us ahead of the scale here. So, next Sabbath, part 4.